This series of Climate Champions is sponsored by the Wholesome Foundation to promote its Global Sustainable Design Awards program. The Swiss-based Wholesome Foundation for Sustainable Construction, created by building materials and aggregates company Wholesome in 2003, supports these awards to champion international exemplars of sustainable design. With a deadline of February 11, 2025, the Free-to-Enter awards feature a $1 million prize fund and are open to client-supported and commissioned projects in the detailed design phase that are not yet complete. Projects under construction are eligible so long as their completion date is after 11 February 2025. If you have a project in the pipeline which meets these criteria, I urge you to consider entering these awards. Last year's winners included the Natural History Museum's Urban Nature Project, designed by Field and Fowles with landscape architects J&L Gibbons. Find out more in our show notes or at wholesomefoundation.org. You're listening to Climate Champions, a podcast from the Architects Journal. I'm your host, Hattie Hartman, Sustainability Editor at the AJ. Welcome to our new series, which is about inspirational retrofit projects. The concept of retrofit, upgrading our existing buildings to be fit for a low-carbon future, is now widely understood across the industry. But some designers and clients perceive retrofit as second best to new build. This series looks at projects that are exploring new approaches to the reuse of the existing physical fabric of a building, with some astonishing results. My co-host for this series is Rachael Owens. Rachael is an architect and head of sustainability at Buckley Gray Yeoman and a director at the National Retrofit Hub.
What does it mean actually to reuse the material of the existing building? First of all, you need to know your building. Almost like the existing building sits at the table with the client, with the consultants, and so is in the conversation.
Our guest today is Maria-Chiara Piccinelli, known as MC, an associate director at David Chipperfield Architects. MC joined Chipperfields in 2022 as project lead for the LSE's Firoz Lalji Global Hub, a project which is pioneering a new approach to retrofit. The Firoz Lalji Global Hub is the third in a series of high-profile projects commissioned by the LSE, following Donald Toomey's Saw Swee Hawk Student Center in 2017 and Grafton Architects' Marshall Building completed in 2022. While the Marshall Building makes extensive use of structural concrete, the Firoz Lalji Global Hub was won through competition on the premise of reusing around 60% of the existing fabric. It is targeting net zero carbon, both operational and embodied, Passive House certification, BREEAM Outstanding, and LEED Platinum. The project received planning permission in May 2024 and is currently on site. Previously, MC worked in Tokyo, Edinburgh, and Paris for Kengo Kuma and Associates, where she was responsible for delivering the V&A Dundee, in Rotterdam for OMA, and for Amanda Levitt Architects on the Galerie Lafayette in Paris. She teaches at the London School of Architecture and trained at the Politecnico di Milano. MC, you presented the Firoz Lalji Global Hub at LSE in September at AJ Retrofit Live. The existing building at 35 Lincoln's Inn Fields is an, I think it's fair to say, unmemorable 8-story Neo-Georgian building completed in the 1950s. You are replacing its top 3 floors with an extension in CLT, as well as creating a large central light well at the center of the plan. The whole is limewashed to create a unified facade. The building will contain conference facilities, academic and teaching spaces, digital labs, and a 300-seat theater. There's much more I'd like to explore about the project, so it's great to have you joining us on the Climate Champions podcast today.
Thank you, Hattie. Thanks for the invite.
At Retrofit Live, you talked about a new approach to retrofit that moves beyond heritage and conservation and recognizes the value in existing materials and the physical capital of a building. Can you describe this approach and how it's impacted the design?
With this project, we are exploring this idea of the material being already in the building and having a really, really important, let's say, life. So we think about the building as a material bank, if you want. So the project is not like looking at the aesthetic that the project can bring to the city, but is going beyond this idea of like keeping and retrofitting the building purely because of heritage purposes. And we know that we are in a really big climate crisis, and we have a big responsibility as an architect to really bring or to change, say, our design approach, to have it a wider approach to material reuse and building reuse.
So what does that mean exactly, and what were some of the biggest challenges?
I mean, if we go in detail, let's say...
We're going to go in detail.
Yes. And what does it mean actually to reuse the material of the existing building? First of all, you need to know your building. That is a huge step an effort that you do, and you kind of your team is all looking at this building not because not because it is protected by some sort of law, but because of responsibilities. So like this kind of change in the process of design is because we feel responsible for our design in the future, let's say, and for the impact and the carbon impact that we are very much controlling, and that is part of our design, I would say, consequence. So if we look at how we did it and how we are day to day really looking at this reuse and this material bank, is, as I was mentioning, knowing your building, understanding the opportunities there are within the building materiality at the moment, and then almost this is your starting point for then developing the design. So it's always, I would say, a double act between your design endeavor or the research, the program fitting in, like the kind of standard design process. And then your building is part of this design process, almost like the existing building sits at the table with the client, with the consultants. And so it's an intersparty in the conversation, because as I said, you need to know the material you have, and you need to understand their characters, and you need to understand how in detail you can reuse them.
So am I correct that there were a demolition contract and then a pause?
I would call it really deconstruction. Contract has been, if you want, anticipated compared to the usual process, because we needed to get into the building and needed to understand really the building fabric in very much detail. Of course, we did extensive surveys, so we could have a good idea of the amount of bricks, for example, that the building had, and the quality of the bricks, for example, and as well as the structure of the existing building. You need to know, let's say, is the structure fit, of course, like to extend the building and so on. But more than this, when you start deconstructing the building, you really understand how easy it is for the building to come apart. That is, you don't know, actually, until you start doing it. Because we discovered that actually we have 5 types of different bricks within just internally in the internal section of the walls. The color of the bricks you didn't know, the size of the bricks are different. So it is a discovery process, I would say, but at the same time is a creative process of how what you find, you put it back. It's not purely, that's your material, you just use it as they are. You need to be creative. You need to take advantage of actually this material bank to even enhance, I would say, your creativity.
Yeah, I think that really comes across in the project. And from us, that really chimes as well, that really needing to understand the existing building. But what you've delivered here isn't something that reads as an existing building with a series of extensions. It's really reimagined as a whole composition. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you approached the key architectural moves that led to that final sort of form and composition and design.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rachael. We always describe our approach with the Firoz Lalji Global Hub is a new contemporary building altogether. It's not one building, let's say one old building with an extension at the top. It's actually our project is growing out of the existing building. So it is really this idea that the design is contemporary really altogether. It's a new building altogether that comes from an existing building, but then is able to, let's say, grow out of it, manipulate it. It's not, let's say, you don't shy away. It's not pure kind of minimum retrofit with an extension on top. Because I think our design research really talks about the building layering one on top of the other. So let's say the first layer is not being untouched, is actually being part of the new design. And I think that is the exciting thing.
It does start to make you rethink also some of the ways that we've approached heritage in the past. And something that gets raised a lot is the harm that can be done to heritage building. And I wonder if you've got any views on the way that we need to approach heritage in light of the climate and biodiversity crisis, and where you see the harm building, and do we need to embrace new ways of working with our heritage stock?
I'm Italian, as you know. I come from a background of, I would say, extreme respect for heritage buildings. I would like to kind of discuss the fact that we're not just looking at environmental sustainability, because the climate crisis is, of course, biodiversity crisis and really, let's say, important environmental issues. But at the same time, there are social issues that need to be addressed as much as let's say the climate is all one connected crisis. So that's why I think part of the social responsibility is very much within the relationship between the building and the city, and the building and his representation within the city. So when we talk about, the heritage building and the arm is not just purely the arm to the building, but is also the fact that the building is part of a urban environment in some cases, or is part of a collective memory, and is part of your own community that lives around the building. So I think every time when we discuss about the importance of the arm, is not purely the arm of the heritage, but really we need to kind of widen our description, and then widen also our understanding of what we are harming or who we are harming, and then being able, through discussion and through conversation and through forums, to really kind of take a decision and move on all together. So I think we should widen always our understanding is not purely one, I would say, environmental sustainability that should take over, but is...
Yeah, I really like that, the idea of it's focusing on human health and well-being through multiple different lenses, isn't it? And I remember you talked quite a lot about how you've improved the accessibility, for example, which is a really fundamental improvement that you've made. So yeah, it's really great to see that sort of holistic approach.
So many elements of the building are being reused on site. You've mentioned the brick, which I understand is being reused not only as reclaimed bricks themselves, but as crushed brick in the terrazzo floor, as powder in the interior plaster. How did this process evolve? And what other elements of the building are you reusing?
Reuse of the elements is not stopping just at the elements that we currently have. So you really need to always question, okay, what can I do with what is left over? So basically is really try to pushing the fact that there is no waste, or even try to avoid this idea of recycling as well, because it's recycling, as we know, is not sustainable per se as well. So we really need to feel responsible of what we have. The kind of reuse of the bricks, it doesn't stop at the brick as unit, but it goes to the granularity, if you want, of the scales of the material, because we immediately notice how difficult and hard it is to actually, from a wall, get out of a kind of full brick. You are left with 60-70% of actual broken bricks, and even more kind of powder. So that's where we started from, but we are looking at, a much easier and quicker solution, for example, like lamps. We have a lot of lamps that we're using from the previous building, lamp shades and switches. And So unfortunately, we were not able to, for example, reuse doors. There are elements that are, because of the the design and the requirement from the clients, they are very, very difficult to reuse. Even doors that are very good condition, then it's really difficult to repurpose them into the design because of the fact that we need to guarantee level of acoustic. But in that case, our deconstruction contractor had a big network of, let's say, second-hand, companies, and they really took everything they could, because anything that had value, especially for the doors, that was an easy win. But even other elements of the project, we had really big wooden panels, like a 10 meter high. I mean, we could have reused them, but then they would have been cut in small pieces and kind of devalued, if you want. And we never want to do that. We want to reuse, if you have a big piece of solid wood that is 10 meters high, you want to reuse it at its best. So it's almost like a one-to-one conversation all the time. For every element, you need to find, the right owner, if you want. So then there is a journey that actually is that the material is kind of tracked and is moving from one to the other and to the other. But it is because really people need to value them and understand how to reuse them in the best quality.
So this must take a lot of time.
Yes, it does. The stages of the design, as they are at the moment defined by the RBA, they are so working in boxes, if you want, while circular economy is very much about this, circularity. So it's not a linear process, as you just said. It takes time, and it's very circular. So you need to discover it. You need to go back to your kind of drawing board or design research, and you need the contractor there with you, doing the same journey. And that's why it's so interesting, because it is very much a shift into the way that we think about the linearity of the design process.
It's a whole mindset shift, isn't it? And the idea that there's this new driver in the way that we would design buildings. I like the fact that you were talking about the bricks and how some of them you could use and then some of them would break and then some was just powder. And then you used that quite creatively and thought, okay, well, what can we use the powder for? So you've used that in the clay plasters, I think, as well. And you've got the bricks. And did you also use it in the terrazzo flooring? Is that something that you did? And it creates this sort of quite rich colour palette that all ties together and is varied, but it has this sort of continuity, which is almost a new design aesthetic that is coming from this reuse. And I think I wanted to sort of explore that theme of that continuity and connection with the design of the building itself. And I know that you've created this really through connection from Lincoln's Inn Fields to Portugal Street with this internal courtyard. Previously, the building was stepped access, and you've completely levelled that, and you've got this agora space in the centre of the project. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how that's starting to redefine the wider public realm and what's the intention of the use of that space and how it interacts with Lincoln's Inn Field and beyond.
I'm very interested in this idea of the aesthetic of the climate crisis. Is it are we getting a bit, all bugged up in this same materiality, low carbon material, and all use of wood as much as possible? That is very responsible. I agree, is the way that we should look at materials, really evaluate how much is the carbon. But then there is a bit of a kind of danger of everyone kind of reducing the use of the amount of material that are available that we can use because of responsible choices. So then is it true? Does it exist, this aesthetic of the climate crisis? And I think definitely it does. But then how do we make this really, really kind of site-specific? And how do we make this, responsible choices, but also looking at where you are, looking at your environment, looking at the neighborhood where your building is, and make it very, very specific to the site. And this is where and what it will give the different buildings a completely different aesthetic. Then we can kind of discover a new palette, if you want, or a very specific palette.
And like a new hyper-local vernacular, because then you could extrapolate that and say, and actually we're also taking into account the local climate and how we need to design in response to that. So it's almost doing what was previously really, really common, but in a way that is utilising all the technology that we have now and all the learnings we have. It's quite an exciting sort of mindset shift there, I think, in how we design for the climate crisis. So yeah, really.
Absolutely,
really cool.
And we need to be careful not to have not to have a kind of standard response, if you want, because once you start looking at low carbon material, then of course you get like kind of restraint in the material you can use. But at the same time, as you mentioned very rightly, like a hyperlocal vernacular has an amazing potential. And I think in that sense, what is, I would say, stopping us looking at this is the kind of cost of labor. Because we know that like when we start looking at local firms or processes that require a lot of labor that are like the more beautiful one, because then like you will have, handcraft materials that would be amazing to being able to use it. But nonetheless, there are new technologies that can really help us into this thinking. For example, like with our office in Berlin, we are looking at the possibility of using maybe robots, for example, in reuse. So like how we rethink intense labor processes, but then using technologies that can, for example, be more affordable.
Yeah, and we've heard quite a bit that, contractors have been gradually sort of getting more and more sort of distant and more safe as they've worked on projects. But now what we're asking them to do is get really hands-on again, which is really great in some ways because it means we're making the most of the materials we have. But then we don't want to inadvertently introduce lots of risk on site and lots of manual labour, which isn't necessarily the work that is the best quality work. So I think we've got to bear in mind that sort of social value balance. So it sounds like if there's innovations in the way that we can utilise technology and robots to do that, then that could be really beneficial for the workforce as well.
I agree. I think in our case, as you know, the LSE is the LSE is very much part of the process, and it would be really, really complicated because if they weren't, if you have a client that is not as open, if you want to take responsibility and to take also a part of the risk, I think that would be really hard because, as you say, the contractor they need to get back or they need to get on board with this idea that is no news. Go back in time in terms of understanding how the process was possible, but then in current, let's say, condition, understanding how to mitigate the risks for everyone. And the best is really that everyone takes a piece of the risk, basically, and then is shared.
So just to recap, this was a process of discovering what could be reused through the deconstruction process. It wasn't that you had particular targets of any kind.
So we had targets related to circular economy as part of the competition brief. Zero to landfill, obviously. But also we had a maximum percentage of material for recycling and, let's say, a minimum percentage of material to be reused on the building or elsewhere. In fact, all the other, let's say, competitors at the beginning of the competition, they actually proposed to demolish, all of them, the facade of the building. So nobody kept the facade. We were the only team that actually saw a value into keeping the facade of this building in place. We need to move forward from a facade retention projects that are really not acceptable anymore, in my opinion.
And you mentioned at the start that you had this separate contract for the deconstruction, and then you had some time in the middle, and then you went into the contract for the new build. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, was that something that you decided from the beginning? Did everyone buy into that as an idea? And what did that time in the middle look like, and who was involved in that discovery?
Yeah, to be very specific, we are still in kind of deconstruction mode, so there will not be
of course,
there will not be
I'm just pretending that you're finished. Yeah.
Not yet, not yet. So the procurement actually changed, maybe during stage 3. The first half of stage 3 was really setting up the procurement strategy to enable the design, I would say. So then the project manager decided to propose to tender the enabling work separately with a very early contract that could start on site really early and push, the deconstruct of the building and the discovery of the building.
Which I guess feels like a pretty typical way of approaching a building like this. So we're not necessarily saying that there needs to be massive changes in the way that we procure buildings if we're going to embed the circular economy. It's just a willingness to make those circular loops as you go along.
Absolutely. And I think we've been working with Reusefully. They are kind of consultant for circular economy. They've been really good in doing the first material survey.
So what skill set do they have, Reusefully?
So they come on site, they do this big material survey that is partially some investigation, but mainly is, visual, and they estimate the quantity, okay? So how many tons of bricks do we have? And that is great. It's not about being precise. That is also key. It's not that they were spot on, for example, in terms of quantity, but it gives us something to feel confident that we can reuse. For example, we knew that we wanted to do all the ground floor internal walls in bricks, for example. We wanted to do the terrazzo, and they were kind of supporting with their information and their quantity estimation our proposal, because actually we do have those bricks, and we do have and we knew how much we had. So it is an opportunity, in my opinion, always to, let's say, widen the research around it. It's not about our design.
One of the photos you showed, the mountain of brick inside the existing building once the demolition, it is mind-boggling. It looks like a war zone.
Yes, indeed. And it is and that's why I think involving students and involving, young architects, that's the future generation. This is we have the responsibility of actually open up, if you want, sites and really use as a teaching environment. This pile of bricks that you mentioned, yes, it is quite, impressive when you see there. And if you don't see it, then it becomes a big problem for the future generation.
So how did you deal with warranties for some of the materials you reused? What were some of the challenges?
First of all, it's very important to say that we are reusing materials mainly for finishes. So we are not reusing any material for structural reasons. So using it as a finishes is much
easier.
Yes, exactly. The risk is less. And then there are elements, for example, the contractor is happy to kind of re-warrant, for example, the lighting fitting, or engineers that can easily re-warrant, let's say, lighting switches and so on.
Yeah, it's quite exciting to see how much the supply chain is evolving in this space to be able to do research and offer more. One of our projects about 4 years ago, we wanted to do the same thing with the facade. We wanted to use it in the terrazzo, the facade that we were demolishing. And at the time, if you wanted to do that, you had to ship it off to Italy and have it made. And by the time you'd done that, you'd blown your carbon budget by transporting it all. But now companies like this are popping up, and we have a little sample of one made of black granite. And what's really nice is that that's going to look completely different to the sample that you have. And it's that sort of really bespoke feeling that I think a lot of the people we're working with also appreciate. I guess something that we're also really seeing evolving in the built environment industry is our approach to biodiversity. We've seen the biodiversity net gain legislation coming in. And then I think that you've got a really impressive target, I think about 100% biodiversity net gain. And I wondered how you'd managed to achieve that on we're planning to manage to achieve it on such a tight urban site.
Yes, I think, Rachael, this is mainly because we were starting from zero. So it was very, very easy, actually, to kind of implement 100% improvement, because the site is 100% dry. And there is no biodiversity whatsoever present. So then what we really work on and focus on with Jo, she is our landscape architect. She saw this opportunity of extending the urban forest from the Lincoln's Inn Field Park just in front of us. So we are lucky enough not to have a basement underneath our front court. So then there will be, as you said correctly, hopefully the first side that will actually be porous and extend the forest into the front yard of Lincoln's Inn Field and be green and really reach the ground and the soil. That is a huge opportunity, like for trees to be able to sit in soil and not in pots is a great achievement, I think. So we really explore every little piece of this building and try to integrate, let's say, sustainable solutions.
A kind of overarching question. So how would you say the reuse approach impacted the program overall?
I think did not impact the program per se.
So it doesn't take longer.
I think what it takes longer is very much like for the design process, because the design process actually overlaps and keeps going through the stage 5. Like it's not stopped, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. We are very much, especially for the reuse of materials, you need to follow your material and be there and kind of take the decision together with the contractor. So it's very much, about this kind of design endeavor that keeps coming back. It doesn't take really longer per se in terms, because once everybody knows what the spirit is, then people are actually bringing ideas on their own, and we are pushing really the main contractor to come with new proposals. For example, we want to reuse things from our site as well. Substructures, supports for solar panels. I mean, all of these can be reused, and I think the contractor, they have a huge opportunity to see through this circular economy and the circularity across their own sites. It's all about timing, in a way. We should work much more in network. And the contractor can do it, especially main big contractors. They are a network themselves. They need to talk to the other, let's say, projects. They should have, a kind of circular economy summit across projects.
So do you think that's the future? 5 years from now, 10 years from now, this is going to be much more common?
Yeah, 2 years, hopefully. I know architecture is slow. We know this. We are a very slow beast in a way. But at the same time, innovation is what, keeps changing. And we should actually just do it.
I like the ambition. I think you're right as well, because the networks exist, so it's just utilizing them. I think the other thing that often gets brought up as a sort of challenge with the circular economy is, where do you store all these materials? So how did you tackle that with both the materials you were bringing in, those you were sending off, and then those that you were reusing internally? Did you have a particular strategy?
You touch really a very sore point. I think storage, especially when you work in a dense urban environment, it is a challenge. The problem is that you don't know until you can explore all the options if you are going to reuse that material itself and how much you're going to use it. You might, you don't want to risk to save more than what you actually want, and to pay for the storage that you actually, for material that you don't reuse. So our strategy was keeping on site as much as possible. I have to say, deconstruct is really hating us for this, because they kept moving basically those materials throughout the building, depending on where they were working, and they were very, very accommodating. But then at the same time is, in my opinion, trying to get in touch with manufacturers as soon as possible, diversify always. Try to get everybody on board and kind of send the brick to the tiling manufacturers, send the timber floor to the layering or the parquet flooring guy, and yes. So everybody feels in charge of a piece.
MC, when you spoke at Retrofit Live, you said something that just really clicked with me. You said that designing with sustainability as a key driver requires a mind shift. Can you just play that out a little bit? I mean, we've touched on many aspects of this, but, we've been talking about sustainable design for so long. So what is it that with this project kind of puts it front and center?
So the design really comes from moving together with all your team and your consultants into the design process. So it's not the architect giving direction to all the other, but is actually a forum, and is a true forum. It's kind of questioning our decisions in terms of aesthetic or in terms of design appearance, if you want, and then test them against sustainability. So it is very much, a mind shift, I would say. As I was telling you, it's not this like a kind of top down or like, we give the design direction. Actually not. The design direction comes from a decision process that involves many different actors, comes from this, forum where we are part of.
Yeah, amazing. I wondered as well to what extent this project for the LSE has impacted other work within your practice.
I think it does. So we kind of try to cross-pollinate as much as possible. As you know, our practice works really internationally. So there are opportunities to really inspire, kind of learn from each other. I think is key, is really, really important. And then at the same time, I was always mentioning like how we are also tied with the wider group. David Chipperfield Architects has offices in Berlin, but also in Milan, as well as Santiago. So like we got in contact with Berlin with the about the research on material reuse and robots, but also we were working with the Milan office because they specialize in furniture. So we wanted to kind of explore the opportunity of reusing also in the furniture proposal. So through, let's say, discussion with the Milan office, they proposed to involve Artec as part of the, let's say, FF&E design for the building. So this is very much in process. As I said, it's not yet appointed, but we discussed with Artec the opportunity of actually using the second-hand legs from, let's say, they have a network of like basically buying out old furniture. So they have lots of spare parts, basically. So we are basically designing new tops for the benches for the students, but then we're reusing the second-hand legs, for example, from the Alta collection. They will be all a bit different because some of them will be from the 80s, some are from the 90s, and so on.
Earlier, you mentioned the future of architectural education. I know you've been teaching at the London School of Architecture. They take quite an innovative approach to Part 2. And at Buckley Gray Yeoman, in my work here, we were involved in leading a design think tank on retrofit for community resilience. And what I found was it was really great to see the students consider how their interventions could empower and improve neighbourhoods, like beyond bricks and mortar, going beyond the pure building itself. And I wondered what you thought about the way that the LSA approaches architectural education. Do you think other schools could learn from them? And is the way that we're approaching education generally changing because of the climate emergency and the reuse agenda?
I'm, let's say, a strong believer in integration between practice and education because I think we need to be, let's say, close. Education is where the research is happening and where, new architects and fresh minds are, and we want to be part of the environment. So I personally think that teaching at academia is key to respond to the climate crisis, absolutely. And we need to push our students to really be responsible and include sustainability. And as you were saying, it's not just environmental sustainability, and social sustainability is really important for the LSE.
Yeah, and I think practices can get so much out of it as well, that engagement, because you're also understanding what's the latest thing that's happening. You're able to sort of engage in a bit of a different level of conversation than the regular day-to-day. I definitely recommend practices to engage with the work that they're doing there, because it can really help sort of enrich what you yourself are doing in practice.
Indeed. I'm glad that you have a direct experience with this, because it's really fun, I have to say.
MC, this has been a fantastic conversation. I have one last question for you. So at what point in your career did you become aware of the climate crisis and its impact on your own work? Was there kind of a light bulb moment?
Scientists, have been warning us about the climate crisis since a very long time. Since the 70s, and I was not even born then. So it is not something that is a discovery, let's say. I feel is part of our responsibility since a very long time, and it's no news. I personally was, aware since studying at the Politecnico in Milano, but also as a very early practicing at OMA, of course. We were talking about the climate crisis then, and then when I moved to Japan and worked with Kengoku and Associate, then it was very much understanding of how natural material and how we choose responsibly the material, and how we look at the local processes and the local manufacture it was really, really inspiring, and is a learning process. Still now, very much learning and try to explore ideas.
That's a perfect place to stop. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much.
So that's it. Thanks for listening to Climate Champions, a podcast from the Architects Journal. Our next guest in a fortnight will be Sarah Castle of If Do. This series of Climate Champions is sponsored by the Wholesome Foundation to promote its Global Sustainable Design Awards program. The Swiss-based Wholesome Foundation for Sustainable Construction, created by building materials and aggregates company Wholesome in 2003, supports these awards to champion international exemplars of sustainable design. With a deadline of February 11, 2025, the free-to-enter awards feature a $1 million prize fund and are open to client-supported and commissioned projects in the detailed design phase that are not yet complete. Projects under construction are eligible so long as their completion date is after 11 February 2025. If you have a project in the pipeline which meets these criteria, I urge you to consider entering these awards. Last year's winners included the Natural History Museum's Urban Nature Project, designed by Field and Fowles with landscape architects J&L Gibbons. Find out more in our show notes or at wholesomefoundation.org. Thanks to our producer, May Robson. Our theme music is Foro dos Dois Amigos by Edmilson do Pífano, interpreted by Felipe Tanaka e Banda Balaio de Baião. Don't forget to leave us a review and hit subscribe for new shows wherever you get your podcasts.